David Adams here, the voice of the ring, and the following is a presentation of the Mancast Network podcasts for the man in all of us.
Hey guys, it's the Princess of Pro Wrestling, SoCal Val from Fight TV, and I am a proud Opinion City girl.
All right, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Opinion City Podcast. This is a professional wrestling podcast where we debate the hottest topics of the past, present, future, and beyond. I'm your host. My name is Ralph Heinmarch. He's my co-host and my tag team partner on today's adventure, and his name is Parmesan Russell. Of course, as you know, we do this podcast for you, the listener, so please reach out to us with your opinions at opinioncitypod@gmail.com.
If you would like to support the show, you can follow us on all the socials at Opinion City Pod. You can follow myself at Parma Cheezel, and you can find my buddy Ralph here at Real Ralph 316. If you like what you're hearing, don't be a stranger. Like, rate, review the episode, let us know your opinions and what you think, and share us with your friends. Now, we are on episode 15 of Opinion City. Ralph, how you feeling so far? How you think we're doing? What's the feel? What's the vibe?
All right, so let's talk a little bit about where Opinion City's been so far. We started this as, just a way for us to kind of get our opinions out there, to talk about some interesting things, stuff we like, stuff we don't like, the kind of conversations that we would have off the air that we thought, we should have on the air too. But I think we've hit a really interesting stride where we're at a point where we're kind of striking this balance between having one foot in the wrestling world and one foot out of the wrestling world, because we get to do our top fives, we get to talk about our opinions, but we have a lot of contacts within the world of professional wrestling, especially the world of independent professional wrestling. Things we've known, companies, people, stuff like that. So I think it's been really interesting where we kind of get to this point of, not just being a podcast where we offer our opinions, but really kind of bringing some people in that, may have had the opportunity to tell their story somewhere else, may not have had the opportunity, but also, we get their opinions as well, and we let them talk about how they feel about professional wrestling, how they feel about independent wrestling. They get to talk about what they're doing. So for me, it's been really exciting because I've always loved the world of independent wrestling. I've always had a real strong connection to that, and so it's been really great being able to do those kind of things and get to really just have some fun and not only have great conversations with you, but also have great conversations with some friends that I know, some new friends, stuff like that. So it's been really good. What about you?
I'm just excited that for the first time, for fans who don't know the behind the scenes of things, but this is our first in-studio episode of the podcast, which is also super exciting for me as well as for Ralph. So that's also another big reason why this episode is so important. And then on top of that, we have our main topic of discussion, which is top 5 shocking betrayals in wrestling. And there are just so many to go over. The first one I wanted to mention, because now we have to go back full swing from SummerSlam, is that Jimmy turn on Jay, which cost Jay the match, which was, I think, my number 3 prediction during that episode.
Yeah, I don't, there's 2 ways to think about this, really. 2 things that I kind of find really interesting about it. One, we've had interviews, and I think we may have mentioned this before, but there are interviews with Jimmy where he's always said he wanted a WrestleMania match with Jay.
Yeah.
And I get that. So we have this whole side of it where this may be, a direction that they wanted to head in. But I also think, and I don't know why we didn't see this ahead of time, but I really think that if, Jay's not going to win the title, well, then how do we move the story forward? Because if Jay's not winning the title, then at this point, Roman's got the win. He's pretty much done with Jay, at least for now. We don't know if that's going to be revisited at any time, but we know that that's almost done.
Yeah.
Like, that's pretty well over for now. So what do we do? How do we because how do we take the focus off of Jay? Because we've spent all this time building up the Jay and Roman thing. And so the only way to really do that, to be honest, is to really go in this direction with Jay and Jimmy and just, kind of take the focus off of Jay and Roman. It's the only way that I can see to really move forward with it and somehow still keep it connected, but take the focus off of Jay and Roman, because we spent so much time building towards
I think
Jay
they
and
did
Roman.
that on SmackDown. If you watch SmackDown, spoiler alert, after Jimmy explained to Jay that I did it out of love, I was afraid that, you were going to become Roman, this a-hole that's a manipulator and all this stuff. So I did this out of love. And if you want to hit me and waste, 37 years of pain, then by all means do it. Initially, Jay didn't do it. He kind of teased and walked away. And then there was a scuffle with Jay and Roman and Solo. Jay got the upper hand, and then Jay calls back to Jimmy, come back over here. And you think they're going to embrace, both of them have their hands out, and Jay just hits this gnarly super kick on Jimmy. Gnarly. And then he basically tells the camera, I'm out of the bloodline, I'm out of SmackDown, I'm out of the WWE, and walks to the crowd.
And what's interesting about that is WWE is really doubling down on this whole idea of Jimmy quitting, because they've already moved his profile on WWE.com. Or I'm sorry, Jay. Yeah,
wrong twin.
Oh, they already moved Jay's profile on WWE.com over to the alumni section.
Yeah, so they're really pushing this whole thing as he quit.
Really playing it up. And Jay's contract is up soon too. So we're kind of getting into like the CM Punk territory again, where you have a wrestler, maybe not in the same vein as CM Punk, because a lot of it had to do with the title, but you have this wrestler who is in a major storyline, who just was in a major title match in not arguably, but the actual biggest SummerSlam of all time.
Yeah.
And his contract is going to be up soon, so I'm sure that in the course of this, they're going to play that into the angle.
Of course.
But
I don't doubt it.
For me, the whole thing was a letdown. I don't think I really wanted to see Jimmy and Jay kind of split. They spent all this time working up this storyline to get the two of them back together.
Yeah.
For all of this to go down, and there's almost no way they go back from this. Like, they can't play this up like, oh, this was the plan of the Usos to make Roman think, because
I think this is a way to give Jay the break, and then, as far as I know, none of them are going to be on SmackDown next week, so they might just give the Bloodline angle kind of like a chapter close pause, because I know Reigns is going to go away for a little bit, and then they don't have him, so why just have Jimmy and Solo? So I think they're just going to kind of pause it and then resume the chapters once everything starts back up again, because it's not that I want them to go that far, but I remember heering that they were originally going to try and push Jimmy versus Jay for WrestleMania 40.
Right.
But that's so much months away still that
much time.
That would be dragging it out so far. By maybe having Jay quit, quote unquote, this gives it time to breathe. We kind of forget about it for a little while, and then we bring it back towards Mania season again.
Yeah.
If that could possibly make it work, because it won't feel as long, because it didn't happen as long. Because remember, Jay quit.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that will be to see what an actual episode of SmackDown looks like without the Bloodline present.
Yeah, because they take up so much time now.
Well, they do.
Almost an hour sometimes of just the Bloodline saga, and it's like, dude, give the other wrestlers a chance to be on the show.
Yeah,
damn.
And I think that leads directly into, for example, why LA Knight showed up on Raw and continued his feud with The Miz, because you've only got 2 hours on SmackDown, and you need guys that need time to get their stuff in.
Yeah.
And you have a guy that's so popular like LA Knight, and now he's not able to get his stuff in as much as they need him to, because I've heard reports from SummerSlam, and LA Knight, with the exception of Cody Rhodes, was the biggest pop of the night.
Oh yeah,
and it's arguable as to which was louder, LA Knight or Cody.
No, LA Knight was pretty freaking loud. When he won that Battle Royal, it was like he won the freaking Super Bowl. The fans went absolutely ballistic.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So you really need time to feature that. So to move him over to Raw to give him more time, I think is smart. But again, just another move, kind of based around this bloodline storyline where they take up so much time on SmackDown. So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like.
Yeah, I'm excited to see if a short break from this 3-year chapter of Once Around, which again, I will say I'm glad that they're doing one that's actually a long storyline, but also at this point they have to keep thinking of new ways to keep it fresh. That's all I'm going to say about that. Now, if we're going to mention Shocking Betrayals, we can't forget the one that everyone's going to say and mention. That's why it's not on our lists, but we are going to mention it because, again, it's just as important as any other betrayals on our lists. And, of course, I'm talking about when Hogan turned on WCW and went for the NWO. How can you not talk about it? It's like it's one of the most memorable scenes in my head of them throwing water bottles and garbage at them as soon as Hogan announced it. The instant heel turn, as soon as he leg dropped Macho Man, was just like, how can you not talk about it?
Yeah, it's and that's the kind of thing that it transcends the world of wrestling, because here we are, how many decades later, we're still talking about it, and part of that is because of just the way that the NWO sort of invaded pop culture and just carved its niche in pop culture.
Yeah.
But part of the reason that it's so amazing and so shocking is because of what Hulk Hogan was able to do previous to that. Now, we here at Opinion City do not necessarily want to make anyone feel old, but we are going to make wrestling fans feel old right now, because Hulk Hogan just had a birthday this past week.
Yep.
And do you know how old he is?
Was he like 77?
70 years old.
But that's close enough.
That's pretty old. I mean, think about that.
I jumped
70 years old. But
I jumped it.
But he had this amazing career, before the turn in WCW, and you look at he was such a huge figure in pretty much everything that happened in the success of professional wrestling in the 80s. There'd be no WrestleMania. There'd be none of this. I don't think if Hulkamania ran wild in the 80s. And again, a creation of a lot of people. Hulk Hogan was the star, but we can't, forget everyone else that had pieces in it, from Vince McMahon to Roddy Piper being the perfect heel for him.
Yeah.
Just great stuff that all kind of worked together to build this thing. But that's almost why it was so shocking, because you had this, I mean, at
nobody
this
thought
point,
Hogan was going to be like Everton heel, because he truly believed in the whole vitamins, prayers, and American way gimmick. So nobody thought. I think even the show day of, it was like Hogan didn't choose until the very last minute what he was going to do.
Well, and part of that story is that Sting was the one that was always supposed to turn, and they weren't sure if Sting was going to do it or not, and so they had Hogan as the backup plan, and then Hogan wasn't sure he was going to do it, and there were so many factors that because you think about it, it is a big thing. You become the biggest baby face in literally the history of professional wrestling.
He was the baby face,
and now you're giving all that up. You're pooping on the fans. You're giving it all up. You're done with it. But it was really brilliant. And to say just now, this is just a short story to tell you how crazy this was. So I was in at the time I was taking summer school. I was taking college courses during the summer, and so I was in a math class on Monday morning after it happened. And the professor of the class knew that I was into professional wrestling. So all of a sudden, right in the middle of class, he stops what he's doing and he's like, "Hey, did you hear that Hulk Hogan turned to a bad guy last night?" I mean, seriously.
That's awesome.
Math class,
That's
and the
awesome.
professor says to me, about Hulk Hogan turning heel, and I'm like, yeah, it was pretty crazy because it was. I mean,
no, it was.
It wasn't just a shocking betrayal of WCW. I mean, I hate to really be like this, but I mean, you know, Bobby Heenan kind of ruined it.
Yeah.
I mean, you listen to the commentary, and Hulk's on his way down to the ring, and you know, Bobby makes the speculation, and I'm like, every time I watch it back, because I try to watch that whole pay-per-view, like, from beginning to end, you want to get the feel of what, like, the world was at that point,
Yeah,
as
course.
far as WCW,
Yeah.
and, you know, and then all of a sudden, you know, you've got Hulk coming down, everybody's all excited, and Bobby's like, oh, could he be the third man? And I'm like,
Yeah, as soon as he
Damn
said
it.
it, like it like clicked as soon as he said it, and I was like, no, don't tell me, no, no. And then as soon
Yeah.
as he like went for the fake out leg drop, I was like, oh. But it was done so well though, like it was done so well because he still kind of faked it out, and then did the leg drop not once, twice, but like maybe 3 times. I lost count, but like yeah, it was.
well, and I think most people were probably thinking to themselves, no, it can't be. Like, there's no way there's no way they're going to go through with it. There's no way he's going to make the turn. And then all of a sudden it just happens, and you're like, holy crap.
But
like,
I think he knew at that point as well that his character was getting stale. I think
Oh, sure.
he had to make a decision at the end that are like, do I want to still be this guy, or do I need to make this change? That way I'm not going to still be stale, and they're going to start booing me because they don't want me to be there.
I mean,
So I think at that point he had to make the switch. That way he could stay relevant within the company.
yeah, when you get to the point where Hulkamania is now Pastamania, there's a problem. Like,
I remember that commercial. And
there's
it was
an issue.
dying.
Oh, the worst in the apron and the chef hat, and like
Yeah,
it's
it was
just
bad.
yeah. So, I mean, that was smart. You know, it was smart on everybody's part to pull the trigger on that for Hulk to be willing to do it. Because I mean, you know, like I don't think that could work now.
No.
Like if John Cena came back and turned heel, everybody would see it coming because everybody's wanted it for so long, and
He would become the biggest babyface more than he is now by turning heel.
probably. But yeah, so I mean, and you think back to a time like, you know, when Hogan turned. I mean, obviously the whole NWO storyline was just crazy to begin with because we're seeing things that we never thought we'd see, and they're blurring the lines. We don't know if Hall and Nash are there from WWF. We don't know what the deal is.
Yep.
Like they kind of turning everything upside down, but at the same time, I don't think that, you know, like we were not conditioned for the shocking betrayals like we are now.
Yeah.
Like most of the
We're
time,
trained.
yeah, we see a shocking betrayal and we're like, oh, well, I could have seen that coming. Well, back then, we weren't conditioned like that. I mean, we really didn't have that many, you know, like really big turns like that. I mean, you look at like just where we were at in terms of just, you know, surprises in wrestling and things like that. The shocking turns wasn't like this huge thing yet, but
No.
it definitely, I think, became something after that moment.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It, like you said earlier, it became like bigger than wrestling. Like it's a moment that everyone remembers, even if they're not wrestling fans. They know that moment. Like with your math teacher, like he may not have been a fan, but he knew that moment because it was just so huge for that time because no one expected it. So like when non-wrestling fans know about a wrestling event, that's when you know that it transcends like the entire wrestling universe because it goes beyond that.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of our because on this list, in my mind, might be the same thing where they transcend. Some of them might transcend wrestling. It depends on what yours are and what mine are.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's probably, I mean, that's easily the biggest turn in the history of professional wrestling. So we really couldn't put that on our list because it would have to be number one. There's nobody that
no
can
other
touch
option.
that.
It would
So
have to be number one. Yeah, that
so it
would
wouldn't
be
be,
the end all be all.
wouldn't be any fun.
So, yeah.
All right, so I came up with my top 5, you know, shocking betrayals, shocking turns, what have you. But I did come up with an honorable mention, and we talked about this quickly before we went on the air. I didn't tell you what it was.
No.
But I came up with an honorable mention because when I was thinking about shocking betrayals, there was one thing that popped in my head, and that one thing was not shocking betrayals.
Not shocking betrayals.
So but one single name came to mind when it came to not shocking betrayals or not shocking turns, and that's the Big Show.
Of course. The biggest turner of heel babyface in the history of the company.
So, I mean, every time he turned, it could just be called the Big Embarrassment because that's what it was. So
it happens so often.
As far as Big Show's turns, as of December 2019, now this is the record I pulled off the internet. As of December 2019, according to Wrestle Talk, Big Show has turned heel or face 34 times.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a lot of times.
Unreal.
That's a lot.
That's unbelievable that something like that could even happen.
I just don't think they knew what to do with him because they did the giant thing for a while, but then they're like, okay, how can we keep him relevant? Oh, let's turn him heel again and again and again and again and again.
And even, I mean, even his very first appearance was a heel turn because he wasn't expected to come in as a heel, and all of a sudden he's helping Vince McMahon in a cage match with Steve Austin.
Which didn't help because didn't Austin win the match anyway?
Yeah, because Big Show picked him up and threw him into the cage, and the entire side of the cage swung open, and Austin dropped down, and it was like, the big embarrassment from
way to go,
the get-go.
Way to go.
Listen, and this is nothing against Big Show. He's I'm sure he's a great person.
Talented.
I've met him before. He was super nice. I'm sure he's a great person. He's a great wrestler. He's had a great career. He's been all over the place. Been in some of the biggest angles in history. So. Nothing against the Big Show, but this is as much a knock on creative as it is anything else. Because, the very first thing you said was you didn't think they knew what to do with him, and they didn't.
No, I honestly don't think, because again, you can only be the Giant for so long before people go, all right, what else is it? What else can he do? Can he be funny? Can he be serious? Can he be sad? Can he do more than just be the Giant?
Right. Because I don't know that they've done some good things with him though. I don't understand where the disconnect comes in, because they have done some great things with him. Tagging him with Jericho in Jericho.
That was great.
Tagging him with The Miz. The stuff that they've done with him at times has been spectacular. And honestly, one of my absolute favorite moments in the entire history of wrestling.
His match with Mayweather?
No.
That's a good one.
Well, that was a good one though. What was great about that though was the build up to the match beforehand, where Mayweather took a real swing at him in the ring and broke his nose.
Open,
the build up to that match was great, and I do think that was a good match. But seriously, one of my favorite moments was when Big Show was impersonating people every week, and that seems to be
that was great.
That tends to be a theme
fun.
with me, because I was super into Al Snow when he was the European champion and doing that every week. But when Big Show came out as Hulk Hogan, if you closed your eyes, you thought you were listening to Hulk Hogan talk. The Big Show's impression of
was pretty good.
Hogan was so good. It was spot on. But so my honorable mention goes to every Big Show turn
ever,
and none of them were shocking ever. I mean, it was what's he this week? Is he heel? Is he face? Who's he turning on? Yeah.
Let's take a wheel and spin it.
Yeah, exactly. It's here, we'll just pull out of a hat, and which one are you?
What is
week?
he doing today? He's a heel. All right.
Yeah, and I'm sure there were conversations like that, exactly like that.
Pretty much, must have been.
Yeah. All right, so I feel like this is going to be a super huge topic for us, and some great stuff to talk about.
I'm excited.
Let's just hop right in with your number 5.
My number 5 has, for once, like many of your lists, is my favorite out of my top 5. Just because this was peak NXT Black and Gold days. Peak NXT Black and Gold, and this is when Triple H started getting creative with the ending of his takeovers. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite ones was when he started the whole logo fake out. That bottom logo would appear on the screen. You think it was over, and then something would happen.
Yes.
My favorite one is NXT Takeover Chicago when Ciampa turned on Johnny Gargano, because that was one of the first times where they did the logo fake out, and they had just had a grueling match with Authors of Pain. Remember them? Great team.
Yeah.
They vanished.
I think they quit wrestling.
Yeah, something like
Altogether,
that. I don't know. But yeah, no, they were great. But they lost to them, and they both hugged it out. They walked up the ramp. The logo appeared, and as soon as we thought it was over, Ciampa just goes after Gargano, like in the worst way. Just assaulted him. And man, like, talk about a high show ending in the worst possible way. The fans, and I think even people watching at home, were just like, not just hurt, but heartbroken. Because DIY as a team were just, up to that point, just phenomenal together. Their matches were great. Like, it was just such a twist. And the way they did it was just perfect in my eyes. Again, with that logo fake out, was just the best way to, like, fool everyone, thinking that it was over.
So that did not make my list, but I do have to say that when I thought about Shocking Betrayals, that one did hold a special place in my mind for a couple reasons. One, it was, I mean, to me, it's the definition of what makes a good Shocking Betrayal, because I legitimately did not see it coming, and I was legitimately shocked when it happened. But I think shocked in the best possible way.
No, because it created one of the, I think, best feuds of NXT Black and Gold up until that point.
Oh, it absolutely did.
There were twists and turns at every corner. You never knew what was going to happen. You never knew.
Yeah, and just like you said, I mean, he really went after him. And for me, the key point of the whole thing was the ending visual.
Yeah.
With him just sitting there on the ramp and, like, Gargano laying there, like,
Lifeless.
stone glazed, lifeless, with, like, his head laying on Ciampa's knee. And Ciampa was also
injured.
Ciampa was also looking at the very same way that Gargano was, but yet completely different. Like, Gargano was lifeless, and Ciampa was just, like, emotionless.
Yeah,
like,
he was
it
just
was
like,
so, it was
just
so good.
As soon as Ciampa grabbed Johnny's head and just threw him against the frickin' entrance, I was like, holy, oh man.
Yeah.
Like, it was just a visual that, again, I can't get out of my head, because that was, I think, the start of every other surprise was when you would have to wait for the logo to come and say, okay, is it over, or is it a swerve? Because Triple H would love to just be like, all right, it's over. Psych.
Yeah.
There's more to it.
Yeah,
like,
really. And, you know, we talk about, like, defining moments, but there are defining moments that define, I think, what a professional wrestling character is. And I feel like this attack 100% defined exactly what Ciampa was going to be moving forward.
Oh,
just his character. I mean, you literally saw the moment where Ciampa became this person. And honestly, I mean, if I look at like NXT title runs, and I look at, like, what my favorite NXT title runs were, not necessarily like the greatest runs, but for me personally, what my favorites were, Ciampa's title run is one of my absolute favorites.
Oh, yeah.
Just his devotion and utter obsession with the belt.
He would hold it like it was, like, the last thing on earth. Like, he held that thing like it was his baby.
It was so
great.
good. It was great is an excellent word for that. That to me, and again, you know, the ending of that tag team, you know, just everything that came from that, you know, giving both of them, you know, time for singles runs.
Yeah.
And it served its purpose 100%. I think it was brilliant. And even though it's not on my list, to me, if I look at my list, there are a few of these that are, like, a little bit shocking, but for me, in that shock, I also want, like, a surprise. Like, I want to be fooled. Like, I don't want to think that, like, this turn is going to come. And in some of these that I've named, I feel like you could almost, like, feel a turn coming.
Yep.
But there you couldn't. It was such a surprise.
Because they paused before he threw him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they both hugged, they embraced. I think Ciampa said something to him right before he threw him. You don't know what it is because there was no mic, and he just threw him. so hard through that entranceway.
Yeah,
I was like, oh man,
you really thought this was going to be like a Gargano moment. You thought this was going to be like a whole thing, yeah. And they just swerved us like you wouldn't believe. So that is a great pick. That's one I definitely thought about.
Yeah.
So, my number 5, leading up to my number 5, and the actual moment of the turn. Everyone expected something else to happen.
Okay.
It wasn't this turn. It wasn't surprising that there was a turn because everybody pretty much expected a turn to be coming. However, it wasn't the turn they expected at all. So my number 5 is Seth Rollins turning on the Shield and aligning himself with the Authority.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing about that is, okay, so we should have seen something coming, and I think everybody did, because here you have the Shield, this ultra talented group. Their debut was crazy after just killing it in NXT, and then when they got to the main roster, their series of matches with the Wyatt family are some of my favorite matches of all time. If I had to pick favorite feuds, that would be in my top 5 somewhere, because their matches were just so amazing, and the Shield itself was just so good, and
they were so different for the time too.
Such a cool gimmick in a different way. Like they weren't like any other sort of stable that you saw out there, but the underlying sort of like, I don't know how to put it, like right under the surface there was this kind of almost a tension, I want to say.
Oh yeah,
because
the last like 6 months, I want to say, they started to do this like tease of like dissension between the Shield and the Architect would always bring it back around.
Yeah,
Mr. Rollins.
And part of it, I feel, is that this idea of this tension comes from the fact that you have 3 guys that are just legitimately waiting to break out, waiting to become stars.
Yep.
And so, leading up to all of this, I mean, pretty much, everybody and their sister thought that it was Dean Ambrose that was going to turn on the Shield. That was the thought.
That's
and then
what they were teasing.
When he didn't, everybody was like, "Oh, things are great.
Yep,
like everything's good. Shield's great. Everything's good." And then Seth Rollins just took that and said, "Pound sand."
Yeah,
like he basically told you to eat it, because he just had that was it. Like he was done.
Yeah.
But I think what made that even more shocking, in addition to the fact that he turned, I think what made it even more shocking was that he aligned himself with the Authority and Triple H, which, again, there's all these, subtle hints, and we certainly saw, Seth was using the pedigree, and so it wasn't like, it was that necessarily far-fetched, but at the same time it was.
We were confused, I remember, because me and Aaron, my brother, went to Extreme Rules 2014, the year that the Shield beat Evolution. Oh, wow. And I think it was the very next night on Raw was when the turn happened, and I was like, wait a minute. In my mind, I was like, they just beat Evolution. Why?
Yeah.
Why? I was like, where? This came from, like, in my mind, it came out of left field, because I was like, I just saw them together as one, clean, beat Evolution, and now there's, as Triple H called it, there's always a plan B, and then Rollins happened. I'm like, oh man, that to me was a shock, because I wasn't expecting it, because maybe I was just fooled by the show. They got me. I was duped, but I did not see it coming. When it happened, that chair shot literally silenced the crowd.
Oh yeah.
As soon as he hit Reigns, there was a wow, and then a shh right away.
Yeah, you could hear the air go right out.
Yeah, I mean, nobody saw that coming, man.
No. And I guess, when Triple H said there was a plan B, or there's always a plan B, at that point, I think that there was, it couldn't have been anybody else, because I think the characters at that time, I don't think anyone other than Seth would have fit with the Authority.
No.
And again, here we have these defining moments that we talk about, and we have another turn that kind of sets up someone it eventually set up everyone to what they were going to be. However, like Roman kind of stayed with the Shield gimmick a little bit.
Yeah, for a while.
Dean Ambrose kind of went off on his own, which again was like the WWE version of Indie John Moxley, which was
wasn't
not
good.
No, man,
because he didn't let him do anything. He was just this silly guy that was crazy.
Yeah. We were both on the same page. Although I do like the match he had with one of the members of the New Day, and they had like the ice cream cart,
yep.
and he destroyed the ice cream
yep.
cart. Like he was just outside the ring flipping out, destroying the ice cream cart, and I'm like, that's brilliant. That's just funny to me. That's entertaining. But I mean, everybody kind of knows how John Moxley was on the Indies, and we see a little bit of it. We see a little bit of it every time he wrestles on AEW because he probably bleeds more than anybody else in the sport right now. But
I feel like at this point, if you're going to do like one of those wrestling fantasy things, one of the questions should be, will John Moxley bleed in a match? Yes or no?
Yeah, that would be crazy. But yeah, this kind of defined almost three people's careers as far as WWE was concerned.
It was the launching pad.
Yeah.
For all of them.
That is my number 5.
All right. Good pick. For number 4, the only reason why this one isn't even on the list, because again, for me, it felt like an obvious answer, but it needed to be on the list because, again, similar to the Rollins with the Shield, I think this one also catapulted a wrestler to one of his greatest solo runs, and that was when HBK turned on Marty Jannetty in 91 on the Barbershop show. Because at that time, nobody thought that Shawn was going to turn on Marty, even though they sort of teased it here and there that there was tension between the Rockers and their alliance had been called into question. But the intent of that super kick, to me, was just why it was so shocking, because of how hard he hit Marty. Like, there was that pause, their hands were both raised, and then he just whacked him one. And then of course, threw him into the window, and, shock. But still, like, it had to be on the list, because, again, I think if that didn't happen, HBK's superstardom wouldn't have launched to new heights because of that heel turn.
Yeah, and, we talked about Bobby Heenan a little earlier, kind of ruining almost the Hulk Hogan turn.
Yeah.
Bobby Heenan was brilliant during this turn.
Yeah, this
because
was much better.
He was so good, like... I mean, he was right on top of everything, like talking about, how great the Rockers were and now they're together. And then the minute the super kick hit, he was like, I knew it.
I knew it all along.
Yeah, he was so good. And the moment was so good too. There were a lot of people that played parts in this, and Brutus Beefcake's reaction to the whole thing was amazing.
Perfect.
I mean, they could not have set it up better, and the throwing him through the barbershop window is like this iconic thing
visual,
in the history of wrestling.
You can never not see that everywhere.
But there was another great visual that I really enjoyed from that whole segment, and that's at the end of it, after Brutus Beefcake is attending to Marty and all this stuff, and Shawn Michaels looks in the camera, and he has the WWF magazine with the picture of the Rockers, and he tears it in half.
Yep.
So good.
Again, and I know it's an obvious one, but it needed to be on the list because of what it did for, unfortunately, just HBK, because Marty G. Jannetty unfortunately got kind of the short end of the stick there and kind of went down the card.
Yeah.
And HBK went freaking above and beyond, and I don't think, if he didn't turn heel, I don't think we would have gotten the Heartbreak Kid as we know him today.
Yeah, certainly
not.
What
do you think?
No, certainly not. And I think that his, you could see it from the very moment that he tore that magazine. Shawn Michaels was built to be a heel.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, his heel run as, Intercontinental Champion.
Yep.
Then they brought in Diesel, and
that was great.
The two dudes with attitudes tag team, and like his heel run, I think, because we think of Shawn Michaels as Mr. WrestleMania.
Of course.
We think of him as the icon. We think of him as the guy who, fake retired Flair.
Yep.
We think of we have all these iconic moments. We think of him as HBK from the greatest WrestleMania match of all time, him and Taker.
Yep.
Like, we have these pictures of him, but I don't think we give enough credit to the heel turn, because there's been there's been missteps. Like, not everything he's done has been great.
No, but
I feel
for
like
the most part,
when they inducted him into the NWO, like, we were, but I was not a fan of that. In fact, I was not a fan of the backwards hat he wore during that either.
Yeah, every time.
But yeah, so there were some missteps. When he came back and won the Elimination Chamber in his Shawn Michaels brown outfit, which was just hideous, and the short haircut was terrible.
The haircut I didn't mind. I just was questioning why he wore the brown.
He looked like he looked like he should be selling Dutch Boy paint.
Oh, jeez.
And that dates me as well. But it's terrible. But I mean, there are all these other great moments, like his comeback with the street fight against Triple H at SummerSlam, and just so many great moments from him. But I don't think his heel turn or his heel run gets enough credit for being as good as it was. I mean, it spawned his theme song. It's what
made him a superstar.
His stuff with Sherry Martel was great.
Oh man!
And there's this funny story that Jimmy Hart told about Shawn Michaels' music, and everybody thinks that that's Sensational Sherry singing on his theme song, and it's not. It's actually Jimmy Hart, and they had to dub it up because something happened with the studio that they were supposed to tape in, and they were late or whatever, and they weren't able to get like the backup singers there to record that part. So he recorded it and then just transposed it way up to make it sound like a girl. So that's just a funny.
I think
side
there is
story.
a version of with Sherry though.
There is
a
version
without Sherry, and then there's one with Sherry.
There is. I think there's one very early on. What I think the original was Sherry singing the part, and then they had another recording, the one that Shawn used for the rest of his career, where it's him doing the main vocals, but then the backup vocal is Jimmy Hart, which is crazy. But,
gotcha.
Again, just another moment that really defined two different careers, one in a good way and one in a bad way.
Not a good way.
Yeah. So yeah, I like that pick. That's really good.
Yeah.
All right. So my number 4, and this one is going to take a little explaining because this is not just one turn, but this is 2 turns.
Oh, okay.
So my number 4 spot goes to Sergeant Slaughter, who turned twice.
In one night?
No.
Okay.
Twice in his career.
Okay.
But I think both of them deserve mentioning.
Right.
So we all know the heel turn where he, became the Iraqi sympathizer.
Yeah.
He started listening to, like spouting the teachings of Saddam Hussein, and he brought in General Adnan and all these things.
Yeah.
Burned the Hulk Hogan shirt, which the story I heard was that they originally wanted him to burn an American flag and he refused. So then it became
good for him.
Yes, absolutely. So then it became the Hulk Hogan shirt. That run to me was really amazing. How he won the title during that reign was amazing because that also involved the Macho King continuing his feud with the Ultimate Warrior. And I'm telling you, when Macho King came out at that Royal Rumble match, I mean, I don't think I've seen anybody sprint to the ring faster. Like, I mean, he was doing like 90 miles an hour to the ring to hit Warrior with. I don't know if he missed his cue or I don't know why he was running so fast, but that when he smashed that scepter over Warrior's head, that was like crazy. But Sergeant Slaughter became this huge heel, and to the point where Slaughter tells stories about death threats during that time. And he was on the road for WWE, and he gets this call one time, and they said, "Listen, everybody's okay, your family's okay, but we had to move them to a safe location because we had these death threats, and people knew where your family lived, and so we had to move them to a safe location." So, I mean, he took a lot to. It took a lot for him to really. He put a lot on the line for this turn, and this was like his big return back to WWE because he had been gone for a while.
Yeah.
Him and Vince did not agree on some things, and so he left. And the story goes that he wrote to Vince McMahon and told him how great he thought the product was, and how he thought it was time for him to make a return. And Vince said, "Sure, you can come back, but this is how you're going to do it." And this, so we all know about that. That's well documented. However, Sergeant Slaughter had a turn very early on in his career. So he was a heel to start off with.
Right.
He talks about how he was the first wrestler to really use theme music. He showed up in Allentown one time for tapings, and Vince Sr. said, "Is there anything you'd like us to do for you?" And he said, "Well, can you play this cassette tape when I walk to the ring?" And this was kind of unheard of at that point.
Oh, geez.
And so Vince Sr. said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "Well, it's the Marine Corps hymn." So they gave it to him. They put it on, and it just went from there. And he goes out and he does an interview with Vince Jr., who was just a reporter at that time.
Yep.
So he goes out and he does this interview, and it's this super heelish interview, and he takes his cigar and blows smoke in Vince's face, which anybody who talks about Vince says that that's like one thing he hates is cigarette smoke. Can't stand it.
Yep.
There's always signs up on his office door that say no smoking, all this stuff. So he absolutely hates it, and so as a heel move, he blew it in his face. Well, he figured he was done. He's like, because he did it spur of the moment. It wasn't planned. And he's like, well, I'm done now. So he gets to the back, and Vince Sr., who they said always had like quarters in his hand and was always like flipping quarters or rolling the quarters or whatever in his hand, he's back there doing that and just absolutely loved it. Thought it was brilliant.
Nice.
So one of the things that Slaughter at one point was at dinner with Vince Sr., Vince Jr., some other guys, and Vince Sr. is telling him how great of a heel he is.
Nice.
And Slaughter says, well, if you think I'm a great heel, you should see me as a babyface. And Vince Sr. was like, absolutely not. He's like, no way. We're not doing that. He told Vince Jr., don't you ever turn him babyface.
Oh, jeez.
So when the time came and Vince Jr. was starting to take over, Vince said to him, do it. So he came down to the ring one time after an Iron Sheik match, and the Iron Sheik was still moving his way up the entranceway, and Slaughter specifically bumped into him. And that started everything.
Yep.
And so Slaughter had this huge babyface run after that. Obviously, he left the company over the G.I. Joe issue, because WWE had just signed a contract with Hasbro and didn't want him doing anything with G.I. Joe, and so they basically told him you have to choose WWF or G.I. Joe, and he chose G.I. Joe. So but he had what I feel are two super important turns to a person's career, and even the turn back after he lost the title, after he was no longer the Iraqi sympathizer, he went on this big, long sort of promotional tour. They showed all these videos of him at iconic, like memorials and in Washington, D.C., and he'd do the promos. He'd be like, I want my country back.
Yeah.
and that stuff was great. I feel like that was very iconic as well.
Yeah.
So just, a guy who's had a couple turns, and I really couldn't pick one over the other because I thought they were both super important. So that's my number 4, Sergeant Slaughter.
No, that's a good pick. I mean, I only knew him as a face, so like I knew when he turned heel, but I knew him more as a babyface than I knew him as a heel. I met him last year when I met Sting, and that was really cool. So he's a really nice dude.
He is super nice.
He's super down to earth. So yeah, I only knew him as a face, but good, great pick. It was a twofer. Yeah, there's this not to get off the top 5 here, but there's this cool story about Sergeant Slaughter where he was on a plane one time, and somehow he got a different seat than his wife. They were both on the plane together, and his wife was seated a few rows back behind him, and he was seated a few rows in front of her. So he sees that there's an empty seat next to her, so he's like, asks the flight attendant, can I just move back to that seat? And so they said, well, no, that seat is being saved. Yeah.
As it turned out, the seat was being saved for the first George Bush.
Oh, really?
So George Bush was sitting next to Sergeant Slaughter's wife, and so he finds out that Sergeant Slaughter's on the plane. So he comes up to Sergeant Slaughter and says, I'll switch seats with you. He said, but I'm going to come sit next to you first. And George Bush actually sat next to Sergeant Slaughter and talked to Sergeant Slaughter for, like, I don't know, 20, 25 minutes. Like,
nice.
He was a big Sergeant
Nice.
Slaughter fan, so then he switched seats with him. But just another great, like, there's tremendous Sergeant Slaughter stories.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm a huge Slaughter
a lot of
fan.
good stories.
Yeah.
Of course.
All right, so let's get back into it. We can get off the Sergeant Slaughter kick for now.
Yes. Let's focus in with my number 3. My number 3, I'm going to harken back to, as I mentioned during the Odd Couple Tag Team episode, well, now, wherever you get your podcast, the team of Kane and X-Pac was my number 1 pairing because they were just so great.
Yeah.
And once I accepted them as a tag team, it was so hard to let it go. X-Pac was Kane's like first real friend, and it was special, it was sweet, and everything in between. Until X-Pac betrayed Kane on an episode of SmackDown. It was just like heartbreaking. As a kid, I was so hurt. I remember being so hurt because they were my favorite tag team up to that point. I just loved the dynamic, the whole Kane is slowly being this good guy, even though he's still a monster, and X-Pac being like his, it was just so cool. The entrance was cool. They were cool. They were champions. So when X-Pac turned on Kane, I was like, I remember being crushed inside. Again, it did set off a cool feud where Kane had to get his revenge, and I loved that storyline because, again, I wanted him to get his revenge so bad. I remember yelling at the screen, "You get him, Kane! You get him!" Like just a visual I can never leave my mind. Just like the one with Johnny and Ciampa.
Yeah, that's a really cool pick. So yeah, they were just a fun tag team because back then you really didn't see a whole lot of this idea of like a mashup where you have like the DX and the Kane sort of mashup. So it was really cool to see that. And yeah, everything about them was just a fun tag team. But there was always like this just little part of me that thought like it didn't fit. And I think that's where like the apprehension came in, where I thought, this isn't going to last forever and it's probably going to end badly because they feel like they don't fit for some reason. As cool as it was, as neat as the idea was, I mean, it was fun back then because I would play like the WWE video games back then.
Oh, of
and
course.
I would make Kane's suit green and red, or green and black,
Yep.
to go with X-Pac.
The whole DX theme, yeah.
It was a really cool idea, and but I always had the feeling like this is going to somehow end badly. Like this is not going to be.
Of course, it was going to, but I just
and I don't know how much. I mean, the Kane and X-Pac feud, I don't know. There were parts of it that I wasn't really super into, but it was still good to see because they're both great performers. They're both great wrestlers, and to be able to see them kind of, have their feud. It was really neat because again, I almost kind of felt at that point like that tag team was put together specifically so we could get these guys in a feud together.
Yeah, well,
and
it
was a great vehicle for that. Because again, talking about like the shocking or the surprise aspect of betrayals, it's really neat when they build people up like that, and you get this sense of like, hey, these guys are tight. This is really cool. This is going to work, and then it doesn't.
Yeah,
and you're like, oh damn.
I'm like. What was almost worse for me was when Tori turned on Kane, because that really made me feel bad for Kane, because I was like, he had his first girlfriend, first best friend, and then both of them were like, nah, bro, you're a monster, we don't like you. And I was just like, oh, Kane. That's why I waited for weeks to see him get his revenge on Tori and on Xbox. I was just like, when is it going to happen? I just want to see them both get chokeslammed and tombstone and just bye-bye.
I always felt bad for Tori because I thought she was a great wrestler, and I don't ever think she got necessarily the career she should have had. I mean, she had all the stuff with Sable, and then she had the stuff with Kane and DX, and she was just kind of like She was like the peas next to the mashed potato and steak. Like she was
there for the story.
She was just there to kind of enhance what was happening,
Exactly.
but she wasn't really a main part of it. Like, you could do without those peas on your plate and just handle the mashed potatoes and steak. But good stuff. When I look at like tag teams of guys that are kind of thrown together like that, or just kind of mashed up together, I definitely would put that, if I was talking about like coolest tag teams, they would be in my top 5, because it was just cool. Like listening to the theme song, watching their entrance, like everything about it was just cool, because it was one of those things where you're like, I don't think I ever really could see this happening, and yet somehow it's happening in front of me.
Magic.
Yeah, and it's fun to see. It's fun to see some of the different things that they do with Kane too.
Oh,
like
dude.
Kind of out of the box thinking as to what to do with Kane's career.
Of course, there's a reason why he's one of my favorite wrestlers, if not my number one.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. All right, my number 3 is nothing like that at all. My number 3. So we've had this running theme so far of talking about like moments that have now defined somebody's career and who they're going to be.
Yep.
To me, this one didn't just define a person; it defined a person, a company, and changed the wrestling business forever.
Oh, geez.
So here we have this company that's kind of chugging along and doing their thing, and they sort of have this, connection to the NWA, and all of a sudden you have this guy win the NWA world title and start naming all the, big name past NWA champions, and basically says you can kiss the rear end and throws the belt down as Shane Douglas pretty much turns on the entire NWA.
Oh, wow.
Poops all over them and starts the seeds of changing Eastern Championship Wrestling to the Extreme. Yes. So Shane Douglas turns on the NWA and rechristens the title, the ECW Championship, and just rechristens ECW. And for me, and again, my number 2 and my number 1 have very significant moments as well. But for me, this is a big one. And when I say my 2 and 1, you'll see why I kind of had to go with this as 3, at least in my mind. But for me, this was just a huge deal because, again, we weren't just redefining a person. Shane Douglas was becoming the Shane Douglas that we would always know from that point on, like the ECW version of Shane Douglas, which is my favorite version of Shane Douglas, only second to Dean Douglas, who he refuses to acknowledge.
Dean Douglas.
He won't talk about it. He won't acknowledge it. He won't sign anything that has Dean Douglas on it, which is a shame, because if he just steered into that car crash, I mean, he could make so much money off of that. Just you Shawn Michaels, get an F, and the fingernails scratching across the board.
I acknowledge Dean Douglas.
Yes. The Opinion City podcast officially acknowledges Dean Douglas. I think from now on, I think I'm going to write that into the intro. Like, I'm just going to be like, acknowledge Dean Douglas. So Dean Douglas gets an A.
There you go.
But it defined a character. It defined a company that was a revolution in the world of professional wrestling, and it changed so many things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a pick that I wouldn't have even thought about. I might have been too young for that. Plus, I was never watching NWA. I started watching WWF into E, and now AEW, and a little bit of WCW in there for a little bit. I was one of those ones that would flip back and forth between Raw and Nitro, try and catch something from each show, but the ads were always off, so I always just missed one thing or another. I tried that for a while. I tried to just switch roles, to watch both at the same time. It's very hard. Very hard.
Yeah, I was in college at the time, and my dorm room was the one that, when we had our dorm meetings in the hallway, everybody would congregate around my room, because we had 2 TVs in there, and we had the cable split, and we'd have Nitro on one, and we'd have Raw on the other,
nice.
and
Genius.
We'd we'd really be paying attention to Raw, like we'd have the sound on for that.
Maybe we'd have the video in the background.
We'd also be videotaping WCW. So after Raw was over, we'd run back through WCW and like listen to anything we missed or like cool stuff. But so I followed ECW at the time mostly through the wrestling magazines, because where I lived, we didn't get, even though I was in Pennsylvania, we didn't get a station that carried ECW at the time.
It was also on super late too.
Yeah, they were mostly, they were at that point, they were mostly carried by like, local Philly stations and stuff like that. So I didn't get any of that. I was too far away from Philly. But we would follow them through the magazines, and I clearly remember their very first pay-per-view, Barely Legal.
Yeah.
Someone purchased it and made a VHS tape of it, and there was like 10 of us that ended up trading the tape around until everybody got to see it. And I ended up being the last one, and I still have the VHS somewhere of Barely Legal. It was one of those. It was a Kodak VHS, and it had like the yellow sticker on it with the Kodak logo, and it had Barely Legal written on it with a pen.
Nice.
Like I could see it all clearly in my head.
Classic.
But ECW was such a revolution to the world of wrestling, and I feel like ECW had a lot to do with not just kind of revolutionizing this idea of a company building itself up from nothing to become this major player, but it also set the stage for a lot of other indie companies to kind of do the same thing, because you have these indie companies that have a very ECW vibe to them. They have
XPW, CZW, you got
PWG, Beyond, Chikara. Like they all had these feels where, as a fan, you felt a part of a community.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the things that maybe it's not talked about as much, but that's one of the things that ECW really brought to professional wrestling as well, was this idea of fandom as a community. And there's a ton of stories that talk about that. Just different things that happened in the history of ECW where it was apparent. But if you look at the second one night stand with RVD and Cena,
so good.
You look at that ECW crowd, and that was a 100% hardcore ECW
original
crowd. Original fans,
without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, and you saw that, and it was a community. Like, hey, you can say what you want about any other wrestling company, but don't say anything about ECW and its fans, because we will, the ECW fandom will be on you. Oh yeah,
big time riot.
So now they could talk crap on each other, but it was one of those things. So and it all kicked off with Shane Douglas just betraying the NWA. And what was great about it was a real story.
Yep.
The NWA had no idea that was going to happen. The NWA was pissed after that happened. Like, they went after Todd Gordon, and they were just, they were pissed. So the fact that it was a real thing that nobody saw coming, to me, just puts it way up on the list.
Absolutely. It's another great pick. Another great one. All right, so I think we're on number 2.
We are on
number two. All right, cool. It's, dude, so many topics, but so good. So my number 2 kind of goes hand in hand with number 1, but sort of only because it's the same guy who's done the turn. This one, I don't know if you would classify as a turn, because they were a heel faction already, but maybe it was a face turn for the guy who got the beatdown. And my pick, because again, this whole list for me is about visuals in my head as a kid I can't unsee. And mine is the thumbs up, thumbs down, Randy Orton breakup of Evolution, when Triple H, after Orton wins the belt, they do a big celebratory thing in the ring. Triple H gives him 2 thumbs up, and then his face goes from smiling to serious, slow thumbs down. Batista drops him, and man, that visual I can never not get out of my head, because it's something that I will never forget. Just Orton's shocked face when he gives him the thumbs down, the instant backdrop that Batista takes, which is probably one of the fastest I've ever seen. He snaps him back down to the ground, and then Triple H just eviscerates him. And the whole time, JR, who's again commentary king for the win, is just screaming, "Why? Why are you doing it?" And like, it wasn't even a heel turn because he was already heel, but it was a face turn for Orton. Because no one thought that Triple H was going to turn on Orton, but Triple H wanted that belt so bad because he was jealous, so he just eviscerated him. And that sparked the first big feud with Triple H and Randy Orton.
That's crazy because I never even thought of that one. Like that never even popped in my mind. But that is a really good pick because again, it's a huge change not just for one person but a huge change for four people.
Yeah,
because you had this idea of Evolution where everybody kind of played their part, and Evolution was really like the time where Ric Flair kind of, got his confidence back because he always talks about how, he was really unconfident and unsure when he came back, and Triple H helped him to kind of get his confidence back. But Evolution did such great things.
They were a great group.
Tag title run with Batista and Flair, you look at Evolution, and when you talk about stables, I mean, obviously, the Horsemen are up there as far as, living the gimmick, the presentation, the promos, everything kind of building this image.
Yeah.
And, as wrestling fans later on in years, got to see their sort of their own version of that. We would talk, people that were, big into wrestling back in the day would talk about, I was there, I saw the Horsemen, all this stuff. Well, people later on can say, well, I was there for Evolution, because it had that same sort of vibe to it, where everybody, sort of played their part, and there was just this image of them, even like the early promo work they did, where like the Evolution theme is playing and they're coming up over the hill and they're all in suits, and they lived the gimmick. And you had guys like Batista and Randy Orton who, were both younger guys, newer to the business than Flair and Triple H. And, I don't think they were necessarily people, even now, seeing where their characters went, those are not people that we would see necessarily in those roles. They're not like the Rolex wearing, suit wearing, styling and profiling kind of guys. They're more, they've got their own style, and they're very, rough and gritty, and it's completely different. So, to see them in that role, kind of early on, and, but yeah, it's a turn that kind of shifted a lot of things.
Yeah.
I know that there are talks about how Randy Orton behind the scenes wasn't necessarily ready for the quick success he got with Evolution, and but I think the turn and just having the feud with Triple H, being able to learn from both sides of it. First you're aligned with Triple H, now you're in an individual program with Triple H, and just getting both sides of that, I think, was probably part of why Orton became as great as he did, why Orton is seen as such a legend, because he had, he got to sit under the learning tree twice, technically.
It's one of those things like with Orton where I think in this instance, maybe again, if he didn't have this big turn on him, who knows if Orton would become as big as he has with working with all these big names like Flair and Triple H and all the other names that he working with when he got big with Taker, and when he was the Legend Killer with Foley. He got to play with some big, heavy hitters, and that also helped, catapult his career to new heights after that big turn.
And I mean, he got to the point where, like you said, he was doing the Legend Killer gimmick, which was
my
phenomenal.
Favorite
gimmick. I loved it. Yeah, so good. And even his hardcore match with Mick Foley. Mick Foley considers that that
favorites.
And Mind Games with Shawn Michaels. He considers those his favorite matches. And it's to get to that point where you're able to do the things that Randy's done. I mean, it's just it's incredible to see everything that Randy's done and how that turn facilitated a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, not that he was the best face, because he never really was, up until at least the RK Bro stuff. That stuff to me is magic, but beforehand he never had he was never a decent face until more recently. I feel like his first initial runs weren't great because he was better as a heel than he was as a face, in my opinion.
Oh,
he's a great heel, but face, it's just not his forte.
I mean,
he
if
has
you-
to be the predator, the apex predator.
Yeah.
That's why he's a heel.
If you look at, if we talk about like top heels in the history of wrestling, Randy's up there, because I feel like you have certain guys that come in and they can go back and forth, but you also have certain guys that, like, we know this guy is always going to be a face. We know this guy's always going to be a heel because they're just better at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like that Randy is absolutely 100% suited for that. I hope that before Cody Rhodes gets to Roman Reigns, that Randy returns and he has a feud with Cody Rhodes, because I think he'd be a great heel for Cody.
Yeah.
And there's a great story there with Legacy.
Legacy, yeah. We can bring that back around.
We can't bring. I don't think we can bring Ted DiBiase Jr. back.
Nah, he's gonna be in prison for a long time.
Yeah, he's got some problems, but I mean, I think that would be a great feud because, again, Randy's such a great heel, and I think that really helped, catapult that career for him.
Absolutely,
definitely a great moment.
Yeah.
All right, so for my number 2, we're going 2 for Tizu, and I'm not talking about X-Pac. I just like saying 2 for Tizu. So for my number 2, this is really 2 turns in one.
Right.
And I really felt like this had to be on the list because it was groundbreaking. Nobody saw it coming. And I don't think that this, and again, it's number 2 because I don't think this was a moment that really established anybody, established characters. I don't really think it did a whole lot because I think both of these guys were already superstars in their own right. Yeah. And, one of them, even though he's turning in this moment, there are other things I think that really, this necessitated the turn, and we knew at this point that he was turning heel, but I think there are other factors that contributed to really what his heel turn was. But my number 2 is the double turn at WrestleMania 13 where Steve Austin pretty much went face and Bret Hart pretty much went heel.
Oh, that match! That's such a good match too.
It was funny when you were talking about your number 2 and you were talking about visuals and moments that you couldn't get out of your head. I really thought that this was going to be your number 2 with Austin in the sharpshooter and the blood just dripping from his face.
Yeah,
there's a T-shirt
visual,
out there.
Yeah.
There's a T-shirt out there they sell that's got that in black and white on the front of it, and it is such a stunning visual, even in black and white.
Yep.
But this was unheard of, to have 2 wrestlers go into a match and do a double turn like that.
Switch characters like that?
On the biggest stage, WrestleMania 13. I mean, WrestleMania 13 was pretty much a dud with the exception of that match.
Yeah, it didn't have the best of cards, but Austin and Hart, stole the freaking show, man.
Everybody remembers that WrestleMania for that match, and I mean Bret Hart went full on heel in that match. I mean,
they were smart. They knew that the crowd was turning, so instead of trying to go against it, they just embraced it. They said, "Hey, let's just do it."
Yeah, trying to choke out Austin with the TV cable.
Oh yeah,
hitting him with the ring bell.
Yep.
Bret Hart couldn't have been more heel in this match, and then at the very end, Shamrock putting Hart down, like, you knock it off.
Yep.
Like, boy, that was quite a moment too. But we had just never seen anything like it before, and I feel like both of these guys were superstars even before this, and I think they would have gone on to huge heights even before this. And I still think that we would have seen Austin become face at some point because the crowd was just behind him, and there was it didn't matter what he did.
No, he was one of those like in betweeners that like you can have them do the worst things and they'll still be like, yeah, do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you had Bret Hart, who I feel like he was going to turn heel no matter what. And again, this is my number 2 because I feel like even though this facilitated the Bret Hart heel turn, I don't think this was really where the heel turn kind of got its legs.
Yeah.
I think the anti-American part of it, where, here you had a guy who legit, south of the Canadian border was the biggest heel in the company. North of the Canadian border was the biggest babyface you've ever seen.
That match where he came out in Canada when he was a heel and they cheered him to the high heavens. It's such a switch, like you didn't expect it. Like, oh, he is a heel, but he's not in his hometown.
if I talk about great entrances, to me, the whole Hart Foundation entrance at In Your House Canadian Stampede was one of the greatest entrances of all time. The four of them each getting individually acknowledged. It was incredible. And the reaction, like the pop for that crowd, for every single one of them, even Brian Pillman, like
all of them,
the pop was just insane. And then when Bret Hart came out, I mean, the roof blew off that place. And watching the celebration at the end where everybody came running into the ring, and here you're having a celebration like that in Canada, and then the next week, the next month, he's getting booed again more than anybody else in the company. So that's why it ended up number 2 on my list, because I felt like, it was the start of the heel turn, but it wasn't the thing that really gave it its legs.
Heel turn. It was like the start of it.
But it made number 2 because it was such an impressive and groundbreaking moment. We'd never seen anything like it before, where two guys just completely turned in a match.
Yeah.
But it really did save that WrestleMania 13 card, and that's what everybody remembers.
Oh, yeah. They don't remember anything else but that match, because that's what defined WrestleMania 13.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not even Taker's match was probably remembered, because, again, it was Austin and Hart. I don't even know who we faced that year.
I believe was that not the year it was Taker and Sid?
That's what I'm saying.
I think it was Taker and Sid.
I know 14 was Taker and Kane.
If we had a producer available, they could look that up
for us. One day maybe.
I think it was him and Sid, if I remember correctly, because I think that was like Cowboy Taker too, where he had like the long jacket with the short sleeves, and he had like the kind of cowboyish hat on, the leather cowboy hat. Yeah, I like to call that Cowboy Taker.
Cowboy Taker.
Yeah. But and honestly, I don't think I can remember another match on that card.
That's what I'm saying. I only remember Stoker.
That was in Chicago, right? WrestleMania 13.
I believe so.
And the other match I remember was the street fight between the Nation and the Legion of Doom and Ahmed Johnson. Because that's when Ahmed Johnson came out and he had the shoulder pads on like the Legion of Doom. That was a good train wreck of a match. That was just. I mean,
you were right. It was Psycho Sid. It was Psycho Sid. Confirmed. Yep. It was a no DQ match for the WWE Championship, and I think that might have been Taker's like second or third reign as champion.
Yeah.
But yeah. Really quickly, I want to again try not to go off the rails here, but just I have it here, the list of matches, and I wouldn't think of any of these other than Austin and Hart. So from the top, Billy Gunn versus Flash Funk. The Headbangers beating Doug Furnace and Phil LaFawn, the Godwins. You have Rocky Maivia beating the Sultan.
The Blue Chipper.
You have Triple H, Hunter Helmsley against Goldust.
See, now that you're saying some of these things, I remember some of them, but I never would have guessed any of that.
You had Owen Hart and the British Bulldog versus Mankind and Vader. Wow. You had Ahmed Johnson and the Legion of Doom, what you said.
Yeah.
Facing the Nation of Domination.
The Chicago Street Fight.
Yep.
Yeah.
None of those matches ring a bell to me. Other
Other
than Stone Cold and Austin.
I just remember there was a move. I believe there was a kitchen sink in that match, or like because I also remember there was something with either flour, baking soda, or baby powder. I just remember Ahmed being covered in it.
Yep.
It was like it was a crazy train wreck of a match. But it was not bad. I'll say that much. But no, not a memorable card except for Brett, and I think Triple H and Goldust was pretty good, if I remember correctly.
I don't know if it was bad. I just remember that Austin and Hart kind of saved and outshined kind of the rest of the card.
Pretty much, yeah.
So that's not to say that the rest of the card was bad if it was or wasn't, but that was what that show was known for.
Yeah.
So, yeah, great pick.
Excellent. All right, so that brings us to
the main event of the evening. Yeah, number one.
Number one.
That wasn't bad. Okay. Number one, like I said, it's the same guy that turns, but for me, the reason why I picked it was, again, visuals. Me as a kid watching this now, this was in 2002, so I wasn't that far into my wrestling, watching career, if you will. I was only maybe like 2 or 3, 4 years in, because I remember my earliest memory is when Kane debuted in the Hell in a Cell against Taker. So I just gotten the tail end of DX was when I started watching it. I enjoyed it, but I only caught the tail end of it. I didn't catch like the early beginnings with Triple H and Michaels. And Michaels had been gone for 4 years, and he had just came back, and they teased a DX reunion, 2002, which I was so excited for at the time. I was like, yeah, I get a chance to see them again. Or so we thought. This is my number one because I just remember the visual so vividly because they walk out, they do the whole DX thing. It was amazing. Triple H does the, well, let's get ready to suck it. And as soon as he says it, he turns to Michaels, gives him the most devastating pedigree I've seen. Still to this day, he just flattens him.
Yeah.
And the crowd was shunned to silence. And then immediate boos, like the loudest boos you ever heard. I just remember being in a state of shock. I had no words. I was just like in a state of silence, just watching it. Because instead of this nostalgic run, what we got was probably the most memorable blood feud of the Ruthless Aggression era up to that point.
Yeah.
Their matches were just ruthless, bloody. They beat the tar out of each other, and they were supposed to be best friends. But that visual of that pedigree was just because he hadn't been back yet. He still wasn't like cleared to wrestle up to that point. He just came back for the tease, the DX, but that's what started his amazing like 7 or 8 year run coming back was that. But just that visual, I can never unsee, even to this day.
Yeah, that's so I think it was probably something that they had always wanted to do because it always seems like, you know, best friends or brothers or whoever, you know, they like working together, but at the same time, like, you know, you always want to have that one great feud, you know, really kind of work with each other in that manner. So, you know, it was really interesting to see some of the stuff they did. But again, like, you know, I feel like being as close of friends as they were kind of made it that much easier to, you know, just tee off on each other. And like, cause like you said, yeah, they had some absolutely brutal matches. You know, I always feel like the idea of this never really sits well with fans. And I feel like the feud itself may not have gotten necessarily the attention it deserves, or maybe like the place in history it deserves as a great feud, just because I feel like the whole teasing of the DX reunion, I think that kind of ruined it for a lot of people, because I think a lot of people were excited for that.
They were legit like excited to see that happen. Like they had been gone for a few years, as you know. We saw like the new version of DX, but we didn't see the OG DX in years at that point. We saw the new version of DX with X-Pac, Billy Gunn, Road Dogg, which is great. But I think people wanted that nostalgic, old school 2-man run again.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't get it officially until 2006, but that initial tease, everyone was so mad when it happened. So mad that Triple H turned. And again, that pedigree I just cannot unsee, because it was just a flat. HBK didn't block nothing.
Yeah.
He just took it.
Yeah.
And I was like, ooh.
I think a lot of the reason that maybe that feud doesn't exactly resonate with people either is that when we did get DX back, it was so bad. Like there were funny moments.
I enjoyed that run.
There were funny moments,
the first
but it wasn't
year or so. But then when it got kind of tuned out a little bit. But the first year or so, I enjoyed it.
It wasn't the DX we remembered. It was,
well, of course not, because Michaels went full Jesus moment, like he saw God and all that stuff. So he found himself. So he couldn't go back to the full on like DX stuff. But he tried.
Yeah.
He would do the crotch chops. He would, but he was sort of like the PG version of Triple H. He would always kind of cut Triple H off, which is why I enjoy when he would be like, "Oh, don't do that."
Yeah, not to get too far off the rails here.
No.
I always wondered about Shawn Michaels, because I get everything that's happened in his life. I read the book. I've listened to interviews. I know the story. I know his testimony. I've heard it a number of times. I mean, I met the guy when I bought his. I went to an autograph signing for his book, all about his, life in religion and his turnaround and everything. So it always kind of made me wonder, like, when he came back and he was like, couldn't do the DX stuff. I didn't really understand why he couldn't do any of the DX stuff, But then when it came to his feud with Vince McMahon and tag teaming with God and all this stuff, he was okay with all of that. Listen, I'm a Christian. I don't hide it from anybody.
Nope.
I make it very well known. I do a lot of things with my church and things like that. I will be the first to admit that the McMahon family prayer, as terrible as it was probably one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah.
I legitimately laughed until I cried watching the McMahon family prayer. I found it so hilarious. But, all this stuff that they did, though, like they got really sacrilegious with it.
Yeah.
When, Vince in the church and it got really bad. And I was just shocked to see that Shawn Michaels would be, involved in that. When he came back and he had his street fight with Triple H, he came out wearing a quote unquote wife beater that had a Bible verse on it. It was like Philippians 4:13, which basically says, I can do all things through God who strengthens me. That was the image that he was presenting as he came back. And I get, bowing out of some of the DX stuff. I get that. But then, being willing to do all that other stuff and be involved in that and not saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't be doing this, or, this is offensive, whatever. I mean, I get the wrestling business, and I'm sure at that point he probably didn't want to cause waves or, rock the boat or anything like that.
No.
Because it doesn't sound to me like, he was intrusive with people when it came to his faith. I have heard many stories of conversations people have had backstage, and even going so far as to have certain wrestlers would have Bible studies backstage and things like that. But again, not to get off on a tangent, we could talk about religion and wrestling for a whole episode.
To
but
come back full circle, I feel like in this case, again, like with all of our other lists, numbers on here, words didn't come out of my mouth right. This is another case where I feel like if this betrayal didn't happen, would we still see the forming of Evolution? Would we get the reign of terror that Triple H caused for over a year? Would we have that side of him had he not betrayed Michaels?
Sure.
And another image that I can't get in my head is when, after their first big match, Triple H nails him in the back with that sledgehammer.
Oh, that was rough.
And
that was crazy.
Oh, man.
Yeah, because you
knew about his back injury, and he had just been cleared, so you're like, oh man.
I mean, how many times did they show the video of him getting dumped over the rope at the Royal Rumble and hitting the side of the casket? They made sure everybody knew about that, and that was a big moment. Hitting him with that sledgehammer, that was huge.
Yeah. So that's why that's my number one, just because of, again, for me it was visual. My favorite was number 5, but number 1 for me was just a visual that has never left my mind as a wrestling fan.
Yeah.
Very Hit me with your number 1, sir.
All right. So
I'm ready.
My number 1, I have to say, if I look at the history of professional wrestling, and I look at Shocking Betrayals, and I look at Shocking Turns, and I look at Heel Turns, and I look at, all of these things together, if I walked up to a wrestling fan, and I'm going to be honest, we talked about Hulk Hogan at the beginning, and I still think that if I walked up to most wrestling fans that have been wrestling fans hardcore since the 80s, the whole WrestleMania and on sort of era, if I said to you what was the most shocking turn or betrayal that you can think, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of that? It's my number 1. I think people would name this one right off the bat. And
can I guess?
Sure.
Can I get one guess?
Yeah, go ahead. Let me finish what I'm saying, then you can guess, because I got another clue.
Okay.
So as far as that goes, I think that's not only the first thing they would say, but I also think that if we look at the history of betrayals, I think that this one catapulted someone to a level that I don't think any other turn has ever catapulted anybody. So go ahead and guess.
Mega Powers Explode.
No.
Damn. Okay. Got it. Don't know.
So and listen, when I first thought of this list, in addition to thinking of all of the Big Show's terrible turns, I also thought of the Mega Powers exploding. And but to me, I don't think that was really a shocking betrayal at all, because I think from the very beginning,
I know
you knew that Macho Man was going to turn on him at some point.
Yeah,
like
it was
you could just see
bubbling over for weeks in and weeks out.
So my number one is actually one we already talked about. It's Shawn Michaels throwing Marty Jannetty through the barbershop window. And I honestly, listen, I think if I asked most wrestling fans, I think I would, honestly, if I had to give it a number, I think I would get 30% for NWO. I think I'd get 70% for the barbershop window.
No, that's fair.
And for me, I don't feel like any turn has catapulted someone to the same level of career that this turn catapulted HBK to. Mr. WrestleMania, the showstopper, I mean, everything that this man has done.
All the names.
Yeah, everything that this man has done in his career, from winning titles to winning the Royal Rumble to main eventing WrestleMania to, coming out at WrestleMania on a zip line.
Facing Taker twice.
Oh, facing Taker twice, being in what most people consider the greatest WrestleMania match of all time. Either that or Macho Man and Steamboat. But I go with Taker and Shawn, partly because I was there live for it, but also because
First one or the second one?
I was at the first one.
Nice.
Yeah. So I mean, I think I saw it live. It was incredible. I think it was much more. I just think it was much more spectacular than Macho and Steamboat, because Macho and Steamboat wasn't just about like Macho and Steamboat. Like George the Animal Steel was involved, Miss Elizabeth was involved. Like it was a thing. Yeah, and when you look at Taker and Shawn Michaels, it was all Taker and Shawn Michaels. And I think the build up to that match was incredible. And quite honestly, I think the entrances were incredible.
Awesome.
When Michaels started way up in the top on that lift
went down
and came down, and he was wearing
all white,
the white version of Taker's outfit. Like, come on,
that's cool.
You cannot beat that.
Talk about visuals.
Good.
That's visual.
But I don't think any turn has ever catapulted somebody to the level of success that Shawn Michaels has had. Shawn Michaels is, a Hall of Famer.
Yep.
Like, it's just, there's so much about it that screams that this turn, in my mind, has to be the greatest turn of all time, even more than Hogan, because to me, Hogan was a star long before the turn.
Oh yeah, of course.
Hogan basically reinvented himself and, showed that there was a lot more to him than just, playing this uber baby face.
He hit the reset button.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. In a way that we'd never seen before.
Yep.
But I still feel like this turn, I feel like eventually it was going to happen no matter how it happened.
Oh yeah.
And I just feel like, for me, this was it. This was the best turn we'd ever seen as far as catapulting somebody to a career and a level that has never been seen before, and it pretty much destroyed the career of another guy.
I was going to say, I felt super bad for Marty. Because, after that happened, they tried with him, but they had nothing for him.
If anybody's...
They made HBK the man, and they're like, all right, Marty, sorry, but, you're going to kind of go over there.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody watched the Dark Side of the Ring episode about
him,
you'll get just a glimpse of it. But I mean,
he went down in a rabbit hole
the biggest,
of depression, man.
Real
far.
The height of his career after that was starring in the New Rockers with Leif Cassidy.
Yeah, but that wasn't even that good.
And even he had one good comeback, where he did the tag match with Michaels on Raw.
Yep.
When the Rockers came back for one night. They're just, I don't know. Shawn Michaels was always destined to be a star, and Marty Jannetty probably just wasn't. He didn't have it, I guess. But for me, this is easily my number one, just because of how important it was for the career of Shawn Michaels.
Yeah, no, it like I said, it catapulted his career. Like, if that didn't happen, again, who knows if we would have the showstopper, the headliner, Mr. WrestleMania, HBK Heartbreak Kid himself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely a big one. And again, these lists are completely subjective, and these lists are, how we feel. So, it's all subject to opinion, which is pretty much everything we debate on this show.
Hence the name Opinion City.
Yeah, how about that? That's a pretty clever use of the English language there. So yeah, so here we are, the end of episode 15. It's been a good run so far. We've got a lot more planned. We've got a lot more guests planned. We've got a lot more great topics planned.
We have All In coming up 2 weeks.
Yes, this is going to be our big one.
It's going to be a big show.
We're going to have. Soon we'll have some special announcements on social media about what exactly we're going to be doing for All In. But we've got some big plans. And no, we're not flying to the UK.
No,
however,
I wish.
Don't think I didn't think of that. But we are not flying to the UK. But we will definitely be doing something special for All In. As
we'll even be back in the studio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we are here again, currently recording from the New Jersey studio, where Sean is normally coming into us from. I am usually at the home office in Lehighton, PA, but we decided to get together for this special occasion here, episode 15.
Yeah.
So it's
been a ride.
Yeah, it's been a fun ride so far. But we've got so much more in store. So just keep listening. We're thankful for every listener we have. We thank you guys for just supporting us as you have. 14 states, like 5 different countries so far. So it's been a run, and we're just getting started. We've got a lot more plans. So again. Big thank you for listening to the Opinion City podcast with myself and my good friend and partner, Parmesan.
Hey-o.
If you like what you've just heard, we hope you will follow us on social media. Let all your friends, family, and colleagues know about us. We are at Opinion City Pod across all the socials, and please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, MySpace. I don't know. Wherever you get your podcasts, please like us, give us a rate and a review. We appreciate it.
Yes, be sure to check out all the other episodes. Go back, listen to them all, catch up with where you're at. Let us know what you think of each topic, as we love to hear from you. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Threads at Opinion City Pod. This has been a Mancast Network production, and we will see you next time.
This is also Ann here. You're listening to Opinion City Podcast. Thanks for tuning in.
Happy trail.